Do you have continuity or association plan for your business?
Has anyone shared the concept of sustainability with you?
What about the need to protect the rights of minority shareholders?
What are those ingredients germane to having effective meetings?
For these and many more, tune into Corporate Governance Platform every Thursday on MITV, your darling station, on DSTV 255 and UHF 43 at 4:30 p.m.
Corporate Governance Platform is your best medium for informative and educative strategies for the practice of the corporate governance profession.
Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, ICSAN, the hub of governance professionals.
Many thanks for finding time to join us on yet another episode of your favorite program on television, Corporate Governance Platform. Corporate Governance Platform is coming to you on the bills of the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria. My name is Adeboyega Labiron. Thanking you for finding time to join us. The program is coming to you from MITV on channel 255 DSTV. On today's edition of the program, we have the privilege of the person of Mr. UWECHIA. Mr. UWECHIA is a distinguished associate of the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, ACIS. And on today's edition of the program, we're taking a look at importance of concept of transparency and disclosure in corporate governance. Mr. UWECHIA, ACIS, I bid you a warm welcome.
Thank
yet another episode of Corporate Governance Platform.
Thank you very much, and I will say Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Well, I'd like to start by asking you, what does the term transparency and disclosure connote?
Transparency and disclosure in corporate governance, first of all, we must say that they are twin pillars, because by the very nature of corporate organizations, they are set up to enable stakeholders, including investors, to take investment decisions. So when you talk about transparency, you are talking about the practice where the board, because it's a very critical factor, it's a very critical function, where the board is engaging and communicating with stakeholders. And we use stakeholders from a wide perspective, not just about investors, it's also the employees, also the community where they operate, how they share information with them on a timely manner, in such a way that there is nothing, no hidden agenda, no secrets, no room for rumor mongering. Of course, disclosure for corporate governance purposes is statutorily mandated, and also by the code in terms of what companies are mandated to disclose, so as to enable stakeholders, especially investors, to make informed decisions about the company. So those two concepts are very, very important. Thank you.
Well, for the benefit of our numerous viewers who are just joining us at this particular point in time, I'd like to quickly mention that you can be a part of this production by sending your text message. To 0705 768 1980. We have the privilege of the presence of an associate of the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria on the program today, UWECHIA, ACIS. May I also ask you, why is the notion of transparency and disclosure regarded as a critical concept in corporate governance? And why the use of the word critical?
There is no redundancy in terms of words that are used. Criticality talks about the place it occupies, how important it is. If you look at fishing as an act, the fisherman must be able to have a view of the pond where he's going to fish, to know where to cast the net or the hook, and be able to know when to fish. So if we use that as an analogy in corporate governance, transparency and disclosure enables the stakeholders to have a fair view of how the company is operating. Because think about it, a company is having challenges, but unknown to the public, the shares are doing well. So some people use their pension money to invest in that company. The next day, the company collapsed. That's a very, very dramatic example of what can happen where transparency and disclosure are observed in the breach. So they are very important. And the regulators, investors, the authorities are very, very clear that companies who put themselves out there in the public ought to and should abide with the principles entrenched not only in the code, the NCCG code, but also in the Company and Allied Matters Act also, as well as the rule book by the NGS Stock Exchange. In fact, if you look at it, the regulators, even CBN, NICOM, PENCOM, all of them, they have a lot of focus on the importance of transparency and disclosure by companies as they carry out their operations. Thank you.
Let me now take you away from that and let's go to financial and non-financial disclosure. Could you please tell us the difference between the two?
Thank you. In time past, I think the public or the investing public has been more concerned with financial disclosures. Normally, when you pick up the annual report, you are looking at the financial statements. You are looking at the statement of financial position, financial performance. You are looking at the numbers. Yes. But from experience, especially after the Enron crisis, it has been shown that non-financial matters could have more debilitating impact on a company. So that, in other words, it's the chicken and the egg. The non-financial issues could be such that it could make nonsense of the financials, because no matter how good a company is, how it is run, for example, its behavior, its conduct, its environmental, social, and governance practices, obviously, ultimately, will have an impact on its long-term sustainability. So, non-financial, now more and more regulators and even the international environment is focusing on those non-financial disclosures. Thank you.
May I quickly tell our numerous viewers that they can be a part of this production by sending a text message to 0705 768 1980. Our text message to 0705 768 1980. We're taking a look at the concept of transparency and disclosure in corporate governance. And we have with us in the studios UCHE, UWECHIA, ACIS. May I quickly ask you at this point to tell us, would you say there is any additional responsibility on transparency and disclosure foisted on companies and organizations during the COVID-19 pandemic?
First of all, I will that word foisted, in the sense that it connotes force, it connotes compulsion.
That's right.
But I think rather
coercion.
Yes, coercion. But no, I rather think it was more of cooperation.
Cooperation.
Because the regulators, especially SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, were very, very concerned about the likely impact of COVID-19. And I want to say that additional responsibility, in fact, public companies especially were required to publish their COVID pandemic policy, and as well as share with the investing public, including posting in their website, what is the impact, as the case may be. And here's an example, and let's praise ourselves when we ought to. I think the way corporate Nigeria handled COVID-19 is very exemplary. Right. To the extent that, if you remember the first case that happened somewhere in the company as operation in Ogun State, how they took it up and provided enough information, and then companies were able to take proactive steps to the extent that the impact as per the pandemic itself, the disease itself, on the employees were very minimal. Even though it has macroeconomic implications because of its global impact, but Nigeria, we should say, handled it very well. And we must thumbs up for SEC for also driving that engagement that enable companies to share their plan with the public as to what they're doing about COVID and to effectively manage it.
Well, can we take a look at our stakeholders' relationship?
Yes.
What is the place of transparency and disclosure?
First of all, you can't talk of transparency and disclosure when you don't even know who your stakeholders are. So a very critical step, and we're saying this because as an institute, we also have embedded capacity and competence to help organizations do stakeholders mapping. In time past, there have been a narrow definition of stakeholders, only to talk about investors and regulators. But no, stakeholders are much wider than that. And our advice always is for each entity, each company, to carry out an effective, in-depth stakeholders mapping. When that mapping is done, then we're able to determine, and ICSAN has the capacity to support them. They're able to determine what fits what. So transparency ensures that all the regulatory and statutory disclosures are made. But let me say this, sir, before we go to the next point, which is to say that we are facing a cultural challenge. As a people, we are very reluctant, reticent to share information. I mean, everybody does want to say it. It's like a culture of silence. But we need to understand that for companies to operate effectively, business executives, managers, directors, boards need to understand that they are not only the stakeholders. There are people out there who are looking at that information and taking life-changing decisions. So my advice would be that we need to do a culture change where we embed transparency and disclosure in our processes. For example, after a board meeting, there's nothing wrong in sending out non-proprietary information to the stakeholders, including the employees. Instead of them nosing around what happened, no, we'll be able to do a statement saying the board made today, they considered the following. They took the following decision, as long as it is not confidential or this thing, so that everybody is aware, and it will reduce significantly rumor mongering and all sorts of speculations that goes on in the environment. Thank you.
The program is a corporate governance platform coming to you on the bill of the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, ICSAN. You can be a part of this production by sending a text message to 0705 768 1980. We have with us in the studio UWECHIA, a distinguished associate of the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, ACIS. Well, I'll take you to the Code of Corporate Governance 2018. On transparency, the code provides that communicating and interacting with stakeholders keep them conversant with the activities of the company and assist them in making informed decisions. To what extent do you agree with the statement?
Thank you very much, Wega. That statement, I think, is principle 27 of the code itself. And then it has a number of recommended practices. I want to say that I wholeheartedly agree with it. And if you look at the recommended practices, that tends to break down the requirement. You talked about, first of all, the need to have a policy. A policy is very important because it provides the roadmap, the guidance, something we can measure the board and the company against. So the policy is important. Number two is about reports that are timely, reports that are clear, written in plain English, not in insurance policy 3 fonts. You know those kind of small fonts?
Right,
no,
right.
Written in clear, you can read it. Anybody can read it. And then the information is duly circulated. And one of the requirements of the code says we need to have a web portal. We need to have investors portal, where investors can go in downloaded format. They'll be able to get relevant information. So it's a critical component of the fact that if you don't have those things going on, then clearly there's going to be a huge gap. So it's something I totally support, both the principle as well as the recommended practices. And again, ICSAN has the capacity to support businesses, including small and medium scale startup companies that want to get quoted, to enable them to be compliant with this requirement. Thank you.
Well, on disclosure, the code provides that, when I say the code, I'm referring to the
NCCG
Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance 2018. Well, the board should ensure that the company's annual report includes a corporate governance report that provides clear information on the company's governance structure, policies and practices, structures, policies and practices, as well as environmental and social risks and opportunities. What is the significance of this requirement?
Yeah, this is the famous corporate governance report that began to be taken very seriously, especially after the code. Aspects of it were found in annual reports before this time, but the code then codified it. And what that means is that if you pick the annual report, you don't have to be looking for this information. There is a whole section, normally written by the company secretary as the chief compliance officer for the code in the annual report, setting out all the things that are part of Principle 28 and the recommended practices under it in the code. So it's a very important thing because here you have a lot of non-financial matters, things around governance, environment. It also mandates companies you must have a viable website. And I want to use the opportunity to say that in a number of companies, you see people are working in silos, which doesn't help. What I mean is this: the tech or IT section, plus corporate communication, for example, and company secretariat ought to work, and finance ought to work together as a team. What do? They will have a calendar that says everything what talking about in this company. You don't need to step into the company to see them. You go on our website, you see them. We launch a brand, it's on our website. We open a new outlet, it's on our website. We acquire some competence, we send our team to acquire some specialist training, it's on our website. In fact, research has shown that a number of companies in Nigeria are undervalued because there are no sufficient evidence or information available out there for people, exactly, yes, non-financial especially. And this is the feedback we get from foreign investors from outside Nigeria. They say, we go to your site, we don't see anything. So companies are really serious about doing business and adding value, creating value, need to look at this area to bridge the gap and ensure that the website is updated on and on. And beautifully, the institute itself, CSAN, can support them in creating that capability. I'm telling you, it will just be amazing. When you go to a company site, you can see what happened last week. Then they can make decisions. They don't have to wait for the AGM, which is about things that have happened 1 year before they can make up their mind. So that's something that viewers need to take note of. And if we have company secretaries and compliance officers listening to us, they ought to step back and ask themselves, how up to date is our website? If I go to your website today, what information will I find there? That's a good test.
Well, let's go to, you just spoke about the company secretary.
Yes.
Some other persons will refer to him or her as a governance professional.
Yes.
A governance professional.
A governance professional, yeah.
Now, what role does a company secretary play in relation to transparency and disclosure?
Wow, it's a very critical role. Let me put it this way. If the company secretary fails in his or her responsibility in this count, it will impact the company. And I'll tell you why. If you look at the rules book, which is the NGS issuers book for companies listed there, it imposes a lot of obligation on the company, often driven by the company secretary and or with the assistance of the finance director. The company secretary is also, under the code, is recognized as a key stakeholder, if you look at Principle 8, in ensuring governance, in ensuring that he advises the company on compliance with the code. And the code itself says, be transparent, disclose. So a company secretary that knows his onions will put in place structure to ensure that on a timely basis, applying the TAC principle, timely, accurate, continuous disclosure of material facts are set out in the principle 27 and 28 to ensure that the company is up to speed. If we do an audit of a company's compliance with transparency and disclosure requirement and it falls short of the bar, the company secretary must raise his hand as the guilty person. And take responsibility. It's very, very important. We can't shift it to other people. I think company secretaries, and I've been in that shoe, I've been in that position. So I know it's a lot of pressure, a lot of work, but it has to be done. And the investors expect the company secretary to get it done.
Let's talk about the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria,
ICSAN. Yes.
Well, does ICSAN have any guidance materials on transparency and disclosure?
A lot. In fact, if you look at both in our publications, in our trainings, we also have bespoke trainings that addresses how companies can comply with this requirement. We also have capacity and templates to enable them draft policies and procedures that will ensure compliance with this thing. So they can always contact CSAN, just a search on the website, and will be of great support in making sure that people are compliant. Thank you.
Well, let's take a look at this other one. And I guess our numerous viewers are watching from different parts of the country. And you can also be a part of this by sending a text message to 0705 768 1980. We're taking a look at transparency and disclosure today. That's on this week's edition of Corporate Governance Platform, coming to you from the studios of MITV. We have the privilege of the presence of a distinguished associate of the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, the person of Mr. UWECHIA. We have spoken extensively on disclosures, financial and non-financial. But before we go ahead, may I quickly ask you to, what advice would you have for corporate organizations on the issue of transparency and disclosure, corporate entities?
Thank you very much, sir. My advice, I think, resounds or resonates with what I have been talking about. It is not a good to have. It is a must have. Number two, I will advise that as much as possible, we avoid tick the box mentality. They say we should do it, we do it. No, we must understand the why. The 4WHT, saying why, what, when, who, and we get it done. Number three is that we must see this process as value added. Often we see compliance as a negative. It's a bad day. It's something that is difficult. No. Because if you read the code itself, it not only talks of environmental and social risk, it also talks about opportunities. And I can tell you, investors are getting more and more enlightened. You see them in investors' call and AGMs. They are beginning, even the shareholders association, they are getting more granular. They are getting more professional. They now have experts who are looking into the annual reports. So let it work for them. Let's put their information that is relevant. But more importantly, sharing concurrent information on a timely basis is very important. And SEC, the stock exchange, have also taken some steps to bridge gaps when you have about 6 months of no communication between third quarter and audited results between end of September and end of March. So they are talking about now you need to submit the fourth quarter interim report so that investors can have some view as to whether what you told us in quarter 3 is still going on in quarter 4. Look at what is going on in Nigeria today. Some banks have to close their branches. These are critical information that ought to be shared with the public using, for the banks that are quoted in the stock exchange, using the platforms provided, saying we are closing these our branches for XYZ reason. Companies have to begin to live up to their responsibility. There's a difference between a corporate organization and an individual. If you want to live privately, please don't set up a company. But if you set up a company, let that company operate within the ambit of what is expected so that we can grow our corporate ecosystem. We have been in the embryonic stage for quite a long time. I think it's time we move, evolutionary to where on their own companies are disclosing information. That will ensure also continuity, especially of indigenous companies, so that when the founder is no more, because there's enough information out there, the company will still continue to exist.
Well, you made a very critical point, especially to this contemporary period.
Yes.
But for the benefit of our numerous viewers,
Yes.
I want you to please re-emphasize on non-financial disclosures.
Yeah, there are.
So I'll probably give us a couple of examples.
For example, non-financial disclosure. A critical, the managing director is not feeling fine. He's having a terminal illness. It happened some years ago. The investors ought to know. It's not a secret. Just as it is the political circle. When the president is not feeling fine, the citizens ought to know. Because that is governance. That is for us to know what may happen in the future. It's a material disclosure. We're having challenges with currency. We can't pay. It's part of operation. We are shutting down this number of branches. The public, investing public ought to know which branches are shut down and why. It should not be speculative. People should not imagine why did they shut it down. No, the information should go out there. For example, you are a company. You are receiving your major supply from Ukraine. Ukraine has been at war. And it has shown that you ought to disclose that. This is the impact. We're having this challenge. This is the impact. This is the steps that we are taking. That way, companies, investors, and stakeholders will have an open and clear view. Because transparency talks about clarity. It's about being open. Disclosure talks about sharing with. For example, you go to the altar to marry a lady. You have already married somebody before, or you have another woman before, and you have 3 children. You didn't disclose it to her. It is a fundamental suppression of very important information. Companies should think in that way. Have you disclosed to the public enough information so that there is no, why didn't you tell us?
Some company secretaries or governance practitioners are watching this particular program.
Yes, please.
In a couple of sentences, before I let you out of the studio,
okay,
could you please tell us, how should a company secretary report this dispensation we are going through? Fuel situation, scarcity of naira,
currency scarcity,
and all of that.
Yeah.
How should a company secretary report that in the realm of transparency and financial disclosure? That's my last question.
Thank you very much, because first of all, we must understand that even though in the annual report, the company secretary is the one that does most of the reporting. However, in most organizations, they have structures that handle this. So it's a risk. And in most organizations, they have a risk structure. In the board, for example, they will have a risk management committee. This issue, because of its criticality, must have been brought by the MD or the executive directors before the board in a meeting, saying, especially if the impact is of critical importance, if we're a financial institution, non-availability of currency is a critical operational issue. It ought to be reported. It ought to be discussed at the board meeting, and then from that board meeting, the company secretary, together with the risk management team, will summarize what the issues are, notify the exchange as required, as well as the other stakeholders, including the staff. This will enable them to avoid second guessing and rumor mongering. Acting is not the crisis that is the problem. It is the way we respond to the crisis. And I think as of now, we need to develop our capacity to proactively manage crises and keep our stakeholders informed with appropriate communication. Very important.
I'll be speaking with a distinguished member of the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, and the person of Mr. UWECHIA, ACIS. He's a distinguished member of the Law Reform Committee, and we've been speaking on the importance of concept of transparency and disclosure in corporate governance. This particular episode of the program was produced by Dr. Tunde Odeyemi, and David Adepoju was my technical director. Mr. UWECHIA, I want to say thank you very much for finding time to be a part of this production.
Thank you very much for bringing such a very hot topic, burning issue on the table, because we are dealing with them right now.
My name is Adegboyega Laberon. Thanking you for finding time to join us on this particular episode of Corporate Governance Platform. And until we come your way some other time, it's bye for now.
Do you have continuity or association plan for your business?
Has anyone shared the concept of sustainability with you?
What about the need to protect the rights of minority shareholders?
What are those ingredients germane to having effective meetings?
For these and many more, tune into Corporate Governance Platform every Thursday on MITV, your darling station, on DSTV 255 and UHF 43 at 4:30 p.m.
Corporate Governance Platform is your best medium for informative and educative strategies for the practice of